Spicy and controversial topic time. Preamble. How do you say this? Preface. Note that comes before the thing. I'm gonna try to present this in a way that is like, this is my view that works for me and that has been developed just by my particular thought and circumstances, and I don't want to impose it on anybody else, and particularly my view, I think, is fairly idiosyncratic, and I can see how it like really wouldn't work for other people in like other situations. Like for some people, adopting this kind of thing would like, or especially like all at once, would feel like complete chaos and sort of less coherence than a more binary or traditional system with more structure, more rigidity. So yeah, this is just what has developed for me and been necessary for me in order to be myself better and interact more clearly and see things more clearly in the world. So I have almost a synthesis of like a super traditional and super quote unquote progressive or like looser view of gender. Traditional in that, to me, things do break down across not only humans but just the whole cosmos in kind of a symbolic way into two clear, well, it's more poetic so you can always debate, but like two gender categories or like archetypes, which is just femininity and masculinity, and sort of you can put things into one of those two groups or like frame things that way. However, I don't attach those patterns inherently to like biologically male and female humans, or like, yeah, that's not something that I hold on to and sort of try to uphold. I notice, and of course like it makes sense that women tend to embody more often the feminine patterns, and males or like people who present or identify male, like the masculine patterns. But that's like a thing. But it just, I guess, happens of itself, if it does happen of itself. Anyway, the characteristics of the patterns or archetypes of masculinity and femininity have been described everywhere and much more in depth than I'm gonna do. And we kind of all have a sense for it, I think. When I started thinking through this and it started sort of revealing to me, it was just in terms of this very simple image of like in and out. Like the masculine is sort of concentrated everything to a point like that, and this is balanced and in tension with and in interaction with the feminine, which is coming from that point, like everything down to one thing out and always expanding out. So it's like this like movement, and I think everything maps pretty much onto that image. But the masculine would be, you know, like one point, like being very sharp and attacking like straight lines, reducing things, you know, clarity and logic and structure and leadership. And is like hierarchical, like structure, yeah. And then femininity is more support, space, softness and openness, expansion, mystery, and like things that are hidden and sort of veiled. Whereas I guess the masculine would be more revealing and laying open almost the bones and skeleton of something and making it clear. And see, these two are not in, they work together, and both are necessary for anything to exist. And healthy masculinity and healthy femininity will support and feed each other. Sort of as I was talking about in the Spaces video, if you have a good amount of like support that is necessary in order for the more structured things to emerge and to be supported and held up. It's like, oh yeah, masculinity also corresponding more to the spirit and femininity to the body. So for instance, if you need like a healthy body in order to support your spirit, if you're just like I was and just living in my head all the time, then I really couldn't even have a good thought and spiritual world because there was just nothing to support it. There was just nothing underneath. Anyhow, then there's of course broken or like toxic patterns of masculinity and femininity, and these two also feed each other in a twisted way. And it's interesting to just observe and try to pick out the underlying interactions when you see something that's obviously going wrong, and like the broken or toxic masculinity. I think we all know the stereotypes, like being too rigid or like overly like, how do you say, there's a word, not sadistic, the one where it's like overly macho, basically, too much structure that just sucks the life out of everything, just like kills everything. And basically the modern West, just a deadness and like not enough life support, flexibility, but just control, domination, structure, too rigid. And then this also this sort of is almost always, there's also the broken feminine patterns, which would be like weepy and too soft, collapsing, absolutely, just no structure, no order, just like falls apart. You think about gossip and like undermining, so rather than control and domination, this would be like from underneath, like rottenness and stuff, just like coming from underneath and undermining. I think these are both, people maybe try to demonize one or the other, and I think they're both about on the same level of harmfulness, and both can be enacted by either actual like gender of person and they, but anyways, they kind of go in interaction, or they go together. But yeah, it's something, it's funny because I used to think that I had too much of like the unhealthy feminine patterns because I was like, I'm a girl, so therefore it must be that. But actually, it was pointed out to me that no, in fact, I was like, I have too much and out of balance of like masculine patterns, as in just being super logical, cutting everything apart, and basically being made of knives, just cutting myself apart constantly, and just like no support and no so basically that's really more the cause of me being collapsing and no structure. If you think of something that's just like made of all of these lines and like sharp lines and such, how is that gonna hold together as a body? How is that gonna like have any strength and keep it together. So the thing wasn't, its solution wasn't to have more strength and like more rules and more like toughness, but the opposite. I needed. Said that in a very convoluted way, but basically, I perceived myself because of the sort of interaction between the two toxic like versions of the patterns. What I perceived was that, oh, I'm collapsing, I'm too soft, I must be like too soft on myself, or just like too soft in general. But in actuality, it was just a lack of support and actually a lack of genuine gentleness and softness and relaxation and like some flexibility. You got the idea. But as far as not attaching these patterns inherently to like the biological sex of the human being in question, the best people that I know are about a 50-50 balance of these kinds of patterns. Where it's like differently distributed in different areas, but basically the vibes that I get, it's about 50-50. Almost like we're all humans before we are whatever other specifications. So like the basic blank like outline of just a human being, and then there are all of these different threads which shape the specific person, or like energies, or like general auras. So yeah, I try to see it very clearly and purely in that way, rather than assuming that like because a person is male, therefore everything that they do has to also sort of be tinged with that kind of thing, almost. Again, other people have described the harmfulness that our very, very, very tangled and sort of decrepit ideas of gender have caused. This has been discussed in other places better than me, but so like somebody who is, I just try to like notice and not say, oh, just trying as much as possible to just see and observe what is there, rather than projecting onto it some kind of system where things have to be one way or other way. Like somebody who is or identifies or presents as male or female is going to generally have like a general aura or overtone, like music. That's not even what overtone means, but you know, just general tone of whatever their main gender presentation is. Like I'm sure even if I was yelling or something, or if I was ever in a leadership position or embodying male patterns, I would still be quote unquote like there would still be the general aura of femininity. That's just, as I consider it, I'm embodying a pattern of masculinity in the same way as like a male human being would do this, but I am who I am, and I'm like a pretty feminine person, and I'm fine with that, and so that aspect of me is going to be there and like influence and have sort of the harmony of the whole thing, and like that's fine. it's not something forced or that like distorts my seeing kind of the purity of the patterns themselves and how they're interacting. Or energies. I think a lot of people will say it in terms of energy. But I spent quite a lot of thought deconstructing the system, basically, or just the conventional ways of thinking about it. Because at this point, it's so broken that I had to basically just shove everything, all of my preconceived notions out of the way and try to just see what's actually going on. And drawing also on more traditional, in the fullest sense, notions and archetypal notions of what femininity and masculinity is. I guess the difference would be, it seems like in traditional societies there is, or in some, the ones that I'm familiar with, there is an expectation that in general, or just a societal structure that in general, women are going to fill feminine roles and men are going to fill masculine roles. And me in my context, that is sort of broken down. Like, so me and my, I don't assume that that is gonna happen or like needs to in order to keep the category, in order to keep the patterns of masculinity and femininity intact. I don't really have at this point any opinions on overall society or like politics, or I think it's, my world is too small and my sphere of influence is too small for me to really have coherent opinions on that. But for me, yeah. Okay, never mind that. But I just feel like there's a veil also between me in this sad little tributary of humanity now and in the like modern West, trying to even look back and evaluate societies where things were like fuller traditional societies that were healthier societies, but also you did have more of a binary between the roles of men and women. I don't know what that felt like. It probably felt different than like in the 50s or something, where it was more, as far as I understand, more oppressive for both. So I don't know, like I cannot evaluate or speak to that. I just, yeah. But what interests me is not the overall society, but just personally and interpersonally. And then especially like within marriages and then family relationships, because I think that's where the rubber really meets the, like where you see the results of certain ways of conceiving of gender. Like the way that it's presented nowadays, all that I have gotten from keeping the notion that like women should be more feminine just inherently and men should be more masculine just inherently is like confusion, really harmful stereotypes, a lot of confusion, and then just excusing harmful behavior, whether to myself or to others. It's almost like instead of imposing those roles from above, I want to let them develop from beneath, and whatever shape they take is going to be the right shape for me and my position and roles in life. Like, especially the kinds of things that I heard about, like, marriage growing up, I was, like, so put off by them, and it really hurt my ability to relate to guys, because the way that it was presented is like as if we were two different species and there were certain things that are like just like girl things and no man is ever able to understand this, or like vice versa are just guy things and like no woman is ever able to understand this. And I'm like, that puts a barrier between human beings, and I think that idea breaks down when, I don't know, it's just, I don't think it's true. Or, like, sort of the mental gymnastics necessary to try to, if you try, because obviously all human beings need to, for instance, be strong, lead the people who are under their influence, and like keep it together in difficult situations and defend themselves or attack when this is necessary. And all human beings need to be vulnerable and nurturing, etc. These are just human things. So then if sometimes you'd hear kind of like, trying to preserve an inherent difference between, say, the way that a father will nurture his children versus the way that a mother would nurture her children, or the way that a woman shows strength versus the way that a man shows strength, or like the way that a man shows vulnerability versus the way the woman. I'm like, to me at this point, it's just clearer to say, when you show strength, like when I show strength, or when I am like breaking something down, try to make it clearer, when I'm like attacking or defending, I'm embodying a masculine pattern, period, that's just it. And when I'm in a nurture, when I or anybody else is like nurturing and, or being vulnerable and open, or like being softer, that's a feminine pattern, and that's just clear. There's, without trying to maintain this overtone of like, okay, if you're this gender, you do it this way, and if you're that, because I don't know, I think it's, to me, it's the same inherently. Like, depending on what kind of person you are, it'll look different, of course, but yeah, that's just the thing. Yeah, I've had my ideas sort of broken down and simplified to the point where now I'm just like, I'm a human being and we're human beings. There are these different patterns that run through the whole universe and that have to do with like the way that our bodies are differently shaped. Obviously, if I was pregnant, I would be that's like a feminine thing, because it's like to be hiding, to be like nurturing and protecting, like I'm taking on a feminine role. That's what that is. And yeah. Anyway, without like upholding this thing underneath of like, and like I was literally made for that, and that's part of who I am, but it doesn't mean that I have to like uphold this thing underneath of, okay, I have to inherently do everything in a feminine tone and like be a woman, even though that probably is the way that it would come across anyway, just because I happen to be a feminine person. But yeah, one nice result of this is that I don't have to be like bothered anymore or oppose anymore people, the LGBTQ people, and feels really good to be able to accept, understand, allow myself to empathize with, and like have solidarity with and show kindness to people who are often really hurting and have had to fight a lot to be able to settle into who they are, like have love. And that feels very good, because I always used to sort of wince when my ideology made me take this position. Like, I knew that I had the moral low ground and I was being harsh and shutting people out and imposing this thing, and I felt like I had to do it, but I really hated it, or like it felt bad, and I always, I guess, wished that it didn't have to be that way. Because I don't know, you naturally want to empathize with people and trust that they're valid and their experiences are valid and a part of the world, and it is like that, which is,